If you juxtapose Haggai and Zechariah, Haggai is focused on get back to building, quit being lax and self-serving and self-whatever. Zechariah is hitting deep down on the spiritual issues that plague these people, the disconnect, the lip service, the not trusting God enough because God would enable and God would empower, and the reference to both the Spirit and God's presence. Zechariah's work can be divided into 4 sections. The first section is a general call to the people to repent before God. That is 1. 2, the recorded 8 visions in one night. The third would be from chapters 7:1 to 8:23. And there's actually timelines to this, like that third section was given in the 9th month of 518 BC, which dealt with 2 primary matters: to fast or not to fast. Didn't somebody else say that about something else? Never mind. All right. And the promise of great blessing in the future. The 4th section can be subdivided into 2 parts, each commencing with the burden of the word of the Lord, which one deals with the overthrow of world powers and the ultimate issues concerning Israel. So there's a lot in this book, and I'm really praying that I can navigate this quickly but responsibly because there's so much material here. Okay, Zechariah's name, whom the Lord remembers, and we know that his father's name was Berechiah and his grandfather's name was Iddo. We know that Zechariah is a priest. He is listed in Nehemiah 12:16. Clearly, he is very spiritually mature. Whatever his age is, he's spiritually mature. And his mission is not just to inspire people to, as Haggai did, to rebuild, but actually his is to reconnect with God. So one is working on the structure, the other one is looking at the people and their disconnectedness from God. I think that's probably the best way to say it. So in that opening statement, therefore say thou unto them, thus saith the Lord of hosts, turn ye unto me, saith the Lord of hosts, and I will turn unto you, saith the Lord of hosts. Be not as your fathers, unto whom the former prophets have cried, saying, thus saith the Lord of hosts, turn ye now from your evil ways, from your evil doings. But they did not hear nor hearken unto me, saith the Lord. Your fathers, where are they? And the prophets, do they live forever? But my words and my statutes which I commanded my servants the prophets, did they not take hold of your fathers? And they returned and said, like as the Lord of hosts thought to do unto us according to our ways and according to our doings, so hath he dealt with us. So think long and clear. Just that those opening verses tell you there's something really disconnected. This opens up, and it should open up, a discussion, or at least the thought, on why this subject is not taught on nearly enough, in my opinion, which is when we use the word repent. From the Greek word, I don't care if you want to read it from the Hebrew, but I prefer the New Testament, metanoia, with the mind, which is turning your mind away from self and towards him. You cease to be going in your own direction. You turn from your ways and you follow him. So imagine that this is how this book opens. And I can't stress this enough. It still is mind-boggling to me after what these people have been through. So if you remember, like Ezekiel, who spoke of a day when the Lord would return to Jerusalem to fill the temple, if you remember that, Zechariah will reveal the future glory in the person of Christ. And when we look at, for example, starting at verse 7 begins the first vision. In the first chapter, verse 7 begins the first vision. We have the vision of the horseman among the myrtle trees. He sees a man mounted on a red horse with 3 groups of horses behind him, red, brown, and white. The man of the red horse, also referred to as the angel of the Lord. And that's why I said you read carefully. There are some things in here that when you start to see them properly, you realize God was revealing messages to Zechariah that a modern today's church maybe not prepared to understand, or even find it hard to understand how God was putting these messages right in their face. So here you have I'm going to say it's a Christophany, this man among the myrtle trees. And the myrtle trees, if you have a Bible like mine, there is a commentary on the myrtle trees. The myrtle trees symbolize Israel. And basically, in Zodiati's commentaries, the rider on the red horse symbolizes war and the end of peace on earth from Revelation 6:4. The myrtle trees symbolize Israel. Yes and no. Read it carefully. It is symbolic of the people, yes. But just keep in mind something. We are kind of seeing a vision. All are standing around, we'll say, myrtle trees in a ravine. If you read just that first vision, after you get through the time that he saw it, he says, I saw by night, and behold, a man riding upon a red horse, and he stood among the myrtle trees that were in the bottom, in a ravine, in a valley. And behind him were there red horses speckled in white. Then said I, O my Lord, what are these? And the angel that talked with me said unto me, I will show thee what these be. And the man that stood among the myrtle trees answered and said, These are they whom the Lord has sent to walk to and fro the earth. And they answered the angel of the Lord that stood among the myrtle trees and said, We have walked to and fro the earth, and behold, all the earth sitteth still and is at rest. Now, the symbolism here is pretty profound. Now, people get caught up on the color of the horses. Even Zodiati said, red is the color of war, yes. But there's something more here when it says, all the earth sitteth still and is at rest. Why? Because the depiction of that one who was speaking is the only one who can bring peace. So when it says, the earth sitteth still and is at rest, that is because the one who is known as the peacemaker, we're talking about the person of Christ, but in a Christophany, is there. Then the angel of the Lord answered and said, O Lord of hosts, how long wilt thou not have mercy on Jerusalem and on the cities of Judah, against which thou hast had indignation these 70 years for the 70 years? And the Lord answered the angel that talked with me with good words and comfortable words. So the angel that communed with me said unto me, Cry thou, saying, Thus saith the Lord of hosts, I am jealous for Jerusalem and for Zion with great jealousy. I am very sore displeased with the heathen that are at ease. He says, Therefore, thus saith the Lord, verse 16, I am returned to Jerusalem with mercies, my house shall be built in it, saith the Lord of hosts, and a line shall be stretched forth upon Jerusalem. Cry it, saying, Thus saith the Lord of hosts, my cities through prosperity shall yet be spread abroad, and the Lord shall yet comfort Zion, and shall yet choose Jerusalem. Now, do not make the mistake of modern, kind of trying to shove some modern ideology in there. When you're going to read a lot of Jerusalem in here, and Jerusalem has always been the apple of God's eye. Whether you like it or not, he starts there. What was once a Jebusite settlement, God had his heart set there. Now, for those people who are confused because of whatever teachings you might have listened to, it's important to understand that Jerusalem will still be at God's, we'll say, the apple of his eye in the future. But what will happen, which we'll read about in here, nations actually come against and turn against Jerusalem. So I've said this many times throughout this series. A younger, a less mature Melissa Scott couldn't understand how everyone would turn against Jerusalem. Do you have any idea of how that could happen today? You are literally watching prophecy being fulfilled, and it's in its embryonic stage, because most of the world is split right now, and people are polarized on this. But how could the whole world, nations, turn against Jerusalem? How is that even possible? That's why I said you be very careful about how you approach things, because all of this matters. How you take all of this in matters greatly. So this vision is given, this first vision is given to encourage the people. And whether you want to parse this with minutia or not, it was supposed to be, it was meant as an encouragement to the people to say, even in this dark time, the Lord is there, the Lord is with us. That was the imagery that was, and that's a very mild or weak interpretation, but that's the simplest way to present this. The people you're going to see still don't understand they need to have a proper and right relationship with God. And by the way, this will become abundantly clear when we touch on the book of Malachi, which happens at a little bit later time than this writing. But by then, everything has come undone in terms of worship, practice, and honoring God. So the next vision, of course, is the four horns. And most of you have been through this teaching. Most of you who have been here any amount of time have been through the teaching, the four horns, which he is told represent the nations that were called to scatter the people of Judah, the southern kingdom, and Israel, the northern kingdom. The four horns represent the powers, the four craftsmen, if you will. These symbolize what the Lord basically cast down, these persecutors, the horns, if you want to call it that, power, horns. So these four horns would be Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, and Rome. Three of the smiths or craftsmen, as I said, it's poorly translated in the King James, Medo-Persia, Greece, and Rome. They were the horns which in turn become the smiths. These four smiths are basically, at the end, you read this and you can understand they are smitten, or they will be destroyed by the King of Kings himself. So that would be connected to Daniel 2:44. And I know some of you listening are going, wow, I'm very confused, you're jumping all over the place. But if you're studying this and you're reading it, you can turn to those various chapters to connect the dots that I'm talking about. Chapter 2 begins with the man with the measuring line, a surveyor. The vision represents Jerusalem in millennial glory. Verses 1 through 3 and verses 4 through 13, promise proceeding from the visions in an earth prepared for full blessing. That couldn't be in the day and age that they lived. That's not possible. Chapter 3 is the vision of the restoration of the work of the high priest. There's a lot here, even for somebody like me who kind of held to certain interpretations. As I sat and kind of did a proper translation, there were certain things that jumped out at me. This you do not need to be a linguist or even a Bible scholar to see. The reference in the 3rd chapter to the branch in your King James, which is capitalized, which is, of course, like you'd have to be completely myopic to miss it, a reference to Christ. And each one of these has not only a reference to the people and their relationship to God, but throughout this writing, you are seeing God revealing we'll call it a standard of relationship that is expected. So the work of the high priest, this all takes place under the representative of, we'll call it the figurehead, Joshua, who was the high priest, who is clothed with dirty garments, standing in a tribunal where he's being accused of unfitness for the position. The judge is the messenger of the Lord, and with Satan appearing to accuse Joshua not to be, we'll say, misread, the change of garments associated with the act of removing sin is an act of grace, that Joshua must walk in God's ways. See, this is the problem. If you read, you're going to see it has two overlapping principles. It's talking about the restoration of the priesthood, but then jumps immediately to the branch, who will be the one and only high priest. There won't be many high priests, there'll be one, and that is Jesus Christ. So there's always these, we'll call double dealings within Zechariah, but always Christ is really clearly envisioned there. And I think what I'm trying to say, it's very hard to articulate, but God was trying to say, basically, as a sample, Joshua, if you will walk in my ways, And if we understand that, it goes back to, there's a word in there, derek, which is covenant fidelity, trying to bring back the covenant that basically had been all but eradicated prior to their going into Babylonian captivity. So there's also this yet to come message that hasn't happened, the fact that God was revealing the coming of the servant, the branch, which is, as I said, nestled in there. In the 8th verse it appears, hear now, Joshua high priest, thou and thy fellows that sit before thee, for they are men wondered at. For behold, I will bring forth my servant, the branch. For behold, the stone that I have laid before Joshua, upon one stone shall be 7 eyes. Don't get caught up in that imagery. This number 7 in the Bible is a number of completion, the all-seeingness of God, which represents the person of Christ. So if you are reading this, there's something else that you got to look at. The end of verse 9, where it says, and I will remove the iniquity of that land in one day. That could never have happened in their day. Do you know what I'm talking about? Could never happen in their day. So it's important to read and understand. Even verse 10, in that day, saith the Lord of hosts, shall ye call every man his neighbor under the vine and under the fig tree. That is a picture in the future of prosperity when Christ reigns as King of Kings. No more warring between brothers. And the picture, the imagery of the vine and the fig tree is very important. Why? Because in the New Testament, we have reference to the vine in John 15, and the fig tree, if you recall, in the New Testament was all but withered up. So there's even there symbolism that must be understood as, you know, God's got it all. He's got it all covered. If we would actually just read and recognize that, you know, today's uncertainties, specifically, again, I speak about and address the people living in a land of conflict. God's got it all covered. The irony is that some will read this and think these are meant either for the people in that day, and it could never have been, because it's speaking of a future time. God's got it covered. There is a promise of something incredible yet to come. So, and also I just also say to you, very interesting, upon one stone, even that verbiage, which becomes the stone the builders rejected, and Zechariah addresses that. You've heard me probably reference the verse so many times from Zechariah, the look upon him whom they pierced and mourned. There is the stone that the builders rejected, when in the New Testament it says he came to his own and his own received him not. So it's all woven in here. Obviously, the 4th chapter begins with Zechariah being awakened from his sleep. He sees a gold lampstand with 7 lights on it. Zechariah is curious about the significance of this lamp and asks for 3 times 4 explanations. That would be in verse 4, 11, and 12. When he says, what is this, right? The plural in verse 4 is referring to the 2 olive trees. He's told that the vision means as a whole. He's explained this kind of totally. A word for Zerubbabel, followed by another message which comes directly to Zechariah in verses 8 through 10. Both messages concern Zerubbabel. If you're curious, that's why I said to you, there are parts of this book that are, to me, it's frustrating, because as somebody, I read it side by side with my Hebrew Bible. I'm like, why did they do that? So yes, I was throwing air punches and doing all kinds of stuff. Like, why? All right. So Zerubbabel will be empowered by the Spirit of the Lord. So in verse 6, when we've all quoted this somehow, and it's okay, you can claim these, not by might nor by power, but by my Spirit, saith the Lord of hosts. Very important. I don't know if you noticed this, but starting with Ezekiel, the mention of the work of the Spirit of God. Yes, the Spirit is mentioned, scattered in the Old Testament, but here we come to a cutting off point where these prophets are speaking almost New Testament language, okay? So there's a lot to glean from this. But basically that the word for Zerubbabel is that they will be successful in the work that has been their assignment. It will be completed. Visions 4 and 5 are about two leaders of the community, Joshua and Zerubbabel. But on a deeper level, they deal with the entire community and its relationship to God. Vision 4 was about how God intended to deal with the uncleanness of the people. Remember, they've come back and they have not really recommitted their way to God. And as of yet, what's not seen clearly here, you read it in a little bit in Ezra, a little bit in Nehemiah, is are they actually trying to restore proper worship? And the answer is no. Okay? If you're reading the same book as I am, the answer is no. So these sections have to do with that God would provide or sustain the community once they were doing what they were supposed to do. And this is, again, crucial. The question may be, well, how will the lamp, for example, be kept burning? That is in the 4th chapter. How is that even made possible? And again, because these people were not relying on God. They were not leaning back and saying, the Lord has spoken, the Lord will make good. Mind you, this is a brilliant lesson for all of us here. If God says something, and again, this requires faith. If you don't have faith, I'm just talking to the wind. But if God says something, the faith that's required is to say, thus far, God's track record has been to come through with his word and make good on his word. So if he's made good on his word, he'll provide, whether it's for how will the lamps be kept burning, which we know in the New Testament has to do with the Spirit, right? But they didn't have that answer. And they didn't have enough to trust God to lean on his word. So there is the response. The reason why I highlighted the response in that 6th verse is basically not by might, not in your own strength, not by your own power, but by my Spirit. God would make a way and enable. Many of us have claimed that. God makes a way where there is no way. And I'm smiling because I was just telling that to somebody yesterday. And then, I don't know if this has ever happened to you, where you're telling somebody giving them some word of comfort, and then about an hour later, that's the word I needed. Never mind. All right, so there is another message embedded in here for the entire group. They must not despise the day of small things. For the kingdom of God can never be understood by those who cannot see him in the smallest details. So there's also, again, if you juxtapose Haggai and Zechariah, Haggai's focused on get back to building, quit being lax and self-serving and self-whatever. Zechariah's hitting deep down on the spiritual issues that plague these people, the disconnect, the lip service, the not trusting God enough because God would enable and God would empower, and the reference to both the Spirit and God's presence. Which, again, how do you get people to trust God? How do you get them to say, I will trust? Well, start with recognizing you can look around you and see God in even the smallest things in nature, in life, in creation. And then recognize that those are not to be despised. If you're looking for the great and magnificent miracle, you may not see it because the greatest miracle may have occurred in the smallest, tiniest thing before your eyes. So it'd be vitally important for them to understand that God would keep the lamp burning and he would sustain them. Chapter 5 in the 6th vision is the flying scroll, and we have this very interesting picture of a 30-foot long, 15-foot wide scroll illustrating the rod of iron rule of the kingdom. The meaning of the vision, the scroll symbolizes the curse of God against sinners refusing him. You can try and read this any other way you want, but the scroll involves both tables of the law and can only curse. So what's God setting up here to do? The thing that he spoke to Jeremiah about a new covenant, I will put a new covenant in their hearts. This is, again, a careful read, and if you are reading it in a Christocentric way where Christ is at the center of what you're reading, you'll see it plainly. Otherwise, if you're trying to interpret in some cryptic message, it's going to just get lost in the fray. The flying motion is the extent of the curse, and the subjects mentioned are representative of all sinners. The enforcement, Messiah's rule. At his second advent and in his subsequent reign, very simply put, you can see equally in there, there is a reference to an ephah down in the, goodness here, I think sixth verse rather, which is a dry measure, refers to commerce, symbolic of commercial Babylon or false religion. You can attach that to Revelation 18 if you want, but there's also the talent of lead, a heavy metal, and then the woman introduced sitting comfortably on an ephah is personified wickedness. You start to connect that imagery. She symbolizes Babylon, and more specifically, the ecclesiastical element, which is kind of that world system at work, trying to bring everything into one pot. This is the exact symbolism unfolded in the book of Revelation. Again, a tragedy that there are words that are not properly translated, so it becomes very frustrating to read it in English once you've read it in Hebrew. And if you can read Hebrew or you have a Hebrew interlinear, please take it out this afternoon or through the week and go through it, and you'll see what I'm saying about some of the words that just, it's like, why? All right. There's also the reference to two mounts, Olivet and Zion. They are mountains of bronze, mountains from which divine judgment will flow, since bronze is usually the metal of judgment. And the four chariots are pictured with their horses. Red portrays, of course, as you know, war and bloodshed. Revelation 6:4 is the connection there. The black, famine and starvation, Revelation 6:5 through 6. The white horse, in this case, is victory and conquest. And the spotted connected with death. There's all of this symbolism nestled in here. The focus is on the horsed chariots, not the horses themselves, and that's something that people tend to focus on, the horses. Be very careful about how you read that. These horsed chariots represent four spirits who are the celestial agents executing judgment against the nations, and the horses portray the judgments. The chariots, the angelic ones that are carrying out these judgments to dispossess wicked earth squatters, if you want to call it that. I didn't know what other term to come up with. Wicked earth squatters. I don't know. Find your own word there, okay? The message concludes with a note of hope for the prophets in that day. And then basically you have the 8 visions that have ended and a new section starts. I've kind of breezed through what's going on here. The 7th chapter, if you have a Bible like mine, it says insincere fasting reproved. So the question of whether or not they should fast came up. That was the big question. And why I think it's very interesting that he has to answer this question is because how can you fast sincerely for God when you're not even connected to God? Now, don't hate me for what I'm about to say, but I'd go so far as to say, I'm not God, I don't judge, I can't see the person's heart, but I'd go so far as to say a lot of churches fit into this category of they think going through the motions of something is well-pleasing to God. But God, who we know sees the heart, knows the difference between a committed heart that is dedicated to fast and to prayer, or to pray, versus the one that does it with lip service and look at me and to be seen. And so that chapter is basically dealing with that, true and false worship, which is very important. And then we have what I'd call a new section that begins. I'm going to try and find where I was in my notes here. So we have a new section that begins in chapter 8. Again, this is a lot of confusion where it says Jerusalem will be blessed. I'm going to ask the question because it needs to be understood this way. This chapter opens with something, again, I'm going to read it. It says here, "Thus saith the Lord of hosts, I was jealous for Zion with great jealousy, and I was jealous for her with great fury. Thus saith the Lord, I am returned unto Zion, and will dwell in the midst of Jerusalem, and Jerusalem shall be called a city of truth, and the mountain of the Lord of hosts, the holy mountain." Now, I'm going to ask you, did that happen in Zechariah's day? Thank you. Thank God. Okay. Got worried there for a minute. Okay. "Thus saith the Lord of hosts, there shall yet old men and old women dwell in the streets of Jerusalem, every man in his staff in his hand for very age." And this is not a description of then. It's pointing to something in the future. So it is God's future blessing and a distinct understanding of Judah as a place that will become holy again. But in its current state, it is not yet anyway, during this passage that I'm reading. So you can see there's a lot that points to future. Then, of course, and I'm just going to jump along because I already see I'm going to run out of time. If you look at chapter 9, where it says judgment on Israel's enemies. And again, this does require looking at something very carefully, because most people, if you are a commentator reader, some of the books that you might open will say, beginning at chapter 9, this is a different writer. I do not think so. What I do think is that there might have been a time that elapsed between everything that came before chapter 9 and chapter 9 onward. There are no chapters and verse. It's just a scroll with one writing. So I think that there was a stop. This opens with the burden of the word of the Lord in the land of Hadrach, Damascus, and Damascus shall be the rest thereof, when the eyes of man, as all the tribes of Israel, shall be toward the Lord. And Hamath, all this requires explanation. The land of Hadrach, which is the area called Hadarika, mentioned in the Assyrian records. It is an Aramean area against which Assyria campaigned in the 8th century. Without understanding the background, it's almost like these are just foreign names, right? So you need to put a little meat on the bone right there. If you're reading this, understand that there are certain things that need interpretation. Verses 5 through 7 are prophecy against the Philistine strongholds, as well as the conqueror taking Egypt as well. So there's all kinds of things nestled in there, but why I'm pointing this out is because if you're trying to make sense of who is being spoken of, there is a reference here that clearly, if you're reading it, understanding these particular areas, they were taken by Alexander the Great, and there'll be a reference to, oh, Greece. The nomenclature wasn't even being used yet. I don't know why the King James decided to do that, but they did. So only Gath, of all of what's mentioned here, only Gath of the 5 cities is omitted for whatever the reason. And the fate of Gaza is recorded in Alexander the Great's records after its 5-month siege. So there's a lot of history there. Verse 8, if you're looking at this passage, "And I will encamp mine house because of the army, because of him that passeth by, and because of him that returneth, and no oppressor shall pass through them any more, for now have I seen with mine own eyes." So it describes Jerusalem being spared. This whole section is in reference to the lands and territories taken by Alexander the Great. And again, it begs to ask how, if this was written maybe 100 years earlier, 150 years earlier, how one could have known that, but God, who knows, right? It's nestled in there. So we've got Jerusalem being spared, Alexander the Great's, I don't want to call it destruction, because he didn't necessarily destroy, he conquered. But at the same time, it's a harbinger of future deliverance under Messiah at his second advent. So there's 2 things being spoken of simultaneously. If you go to the 9th verse of the 9th chapter, the joyful announcement of the first advent of the King and Savior, followed by an account of his character. Just look at what is said. Thy King cometh unto thee, he is just. There could be no one fulfilling that. He's righteous. No one fulfilling that, having salvation. If you have a Bible like mine, there's a note at having salvation, saving himself. That is a terrible translation, but more like he's able to dispense or give salvation. And then lowly riding upon an ass and upon the colt of the foal of an ass. Again, who could that be? I don't know. It's just terribly confusing, right? It's self-evident who we are reading about. He establishes peace. If you read about verse 10, he establishes peace. And so we might see that the suffering that may be taking place now amongst the people is framed in future hope. So each one of these chapters actually has something to deal with the people now, but something dealing with future time and the coming of Christ, either in his first or his second advent. That's why it's mind-boggling to me that somebody could read this and not see Christ is literally everywhere in this book. In chapter 10 and verse 2, it tells us about the second advent. When you read, for the idols have spoken vanity, and the diviners have seen a lie, and have told false dreams, they comfort in vain. Therefore they went their way as a flock, and they were troubled because there was no shepherd. And this begins to talk about how there is a true shepherd, and then he'll go on in the 11th chapter to deal with false and foolish shepherds. So there's all of these, we'll call them juxtapositions, and they are required to be understood in order to kind of get the whole picture. In the same 10th chapter, verses 5 through 12, the Lord promises his presence with his people, the remnant, and guarantees their empowerment, gathering them out of worldwide dispersion. So we can see Zechariah is giving a word of hope, but the bulk of what's contained in his book also points to, as I said, the coming of Messiah, which none of these people, I don't think if they were that disconnected, could have been eagerly awaiting and just what's going to happen next, when is he coming? I think it was just like kind of, yeah, that's nice. I think that's how they must have received it. But the book points to not only the coming of Messiah and his lordship, but his sovereignty over the entire earth. Think about that. So while people say, oh, I don't read the Old Testament, you're missing out, folks, because what's there tells you that God made good in a diversity of ways. So chapter 11 tells us this destruction to the predicted rejection of the Messiah in his first advent. That is in that chapter, which begins in the Lebanon region and goes into Bashan and the Transjordan to the lower Jordan Valley. And if you just keep reading, you'll come across what I call, there is a moment of understanding. With that in mind, from verses 4, thus saith the Lord my God, feed the flock of the slaughter. The prediction of the rejection of the good shepherd is spoken of. And then if you keep going, it reveals the ruin of the flock because of what? Their treatment of him. And two rods or two elements are being dealt with here. In your King James, the word beauty and bands are being referenced in verse 7. Some translations here in my Zodiati's book here in my Bible, bands is binders. I called beauty, and the other I called bands, and I fed the flock. I wish that this would have been translated just slightly different. Graciousness and unity, signifying millennial blessings, but the cutting of the staff shows Israel would forfeit these blessings. That is incredibly important. So this not only tells us about the future, it tells us how Christ will be rejected, and for that rejection, there will be consequences. Now, these are messages people in this day and age, they don't want to hear. You know, we just have to make the Bible something soft and nice and cuddly and everybody can snuggle up to it and feel good. It's just not the way God wrote the book through these individuals. Just like Ezekiel and Isaiah had done earlier, Zechariah acts out this word. He's trying to show a doomed flock, which would include the poor and the afflicted, and goes on to talk about the 30 pieces of silver in verse 12. And I said unto them, if ye think good, give me my price, and if not, forbear. So they weighed for my price 30 pieces of silver. This whole passage is discussing not just the rejection, but the betrayal of Christ, which, if you think about how much is in here, and then you go and you read the New Testament, you have to, there's a lot of questions, a lot. But the one thing you can know when people say, oh, it's a fable, or it's made up, or it's fabricated, I'm sorry, when you start studying this, you can tell it's not fabricated, it's not a fantasy, because here are words being uttered before there was a Messiah in the flesh, tented in the flesh, telling us what this is. Just like Isaiah talked about the suffering that Messiah would endure. This book is talking about a future Messiah. And you tell me who else could have been spoken of as one coming, again, out of Isaiah, born of a virgin, of one born in Bethlehem, of one who would be cut off, Isaiah and Zechariah, rejected. I mean, it's impossible to have all these different people, and although the words they use may be just slightly different, they're all saying the same thing. So I don't know how people could not see this and go, this book is telling me about the coming of Christ, both his first and second advent, also revealing that the people are still stiff-necked and rebellious. Okay, so now that I've said that and everybody is content, in the 7th verse of the 13th chapter, awake, O sword, against my shepherd and against the man that is my fellow, saith the Lord of hosts. Smite the shepherd, and the sheep will be scattered, and I will turn mine hand upon the little ones. And it shall come to pass in that all the land, saith the Lord, 2 parts therein shall be cut off and die, but the third shall be left therein. And I will bring the third part through the fire, and will refine them as silver is refined. Very interesting, because it says, and I will hear them, and I will say, it is my people, and they shall say, the Lord is my God. That could only be in a future time. See, the people have been given so many chances to turn, to see, to understand. Even the words nestled in here, when it says, against my shepherd and against the man that is my fellow, poorly translated, but the man that is my fellow, the man, my equal, deity united to humanity in the person of Christ. My shepherd, my fellow man, that is all talking and discussing Christ. And of course, if you keep going in there, you're going to see the sheep are to be scattered and the faithful are warned of persecution and death, with a dire prediction of tribulation, the great tribulation, eventuating the deliverance of the remnant. And that remnant resurfaces in the book of Revelation. These are all tied together. The remnant calls on the Lord. They are delivered, saved, and testify to the salvation that is in him, Christ. Okay, chapter 14, and this was like we're doing this huge run through a very big book that requires much more time, but remember, this is not exhaustive. There's reasons for putting this out here. Chapter 14, if you have a Bible like mine, and I don't like the headers, but I'm doing this for a purpose, they at least got this right. The Lord will rule. So that 14th chapter, behold, the day of the Lord cometh, and thy spoil shall be divided in the midst of thee. I will gather all nations against Jerusalem to battle. There it is. And the city rifled, and the women ravished, and half of the city shall go forth into captivity, and the residue of the people shall not be cut off from the city. Then shall the Lord go forth and fight against those nations as when he fought in the day of battle. And his feet shall stand in that day upon the Mount of Olives, which is before Jerusalem on the east, and the Mount of Olives shall cleave in the midst thereof toward the east and toward the west, and there shall be a very great valley. And half the mountain shall be removed towards the north and half of it towards the south. So this is unmistakably, of course, a picture of future time. We'll call it when the Lord is here. And why I say this is so incredible, because the very place where we read about in the New Testament that became a pivotal place, the Mount, where people often refer and speak of over and over again, mentioned here. And yes, there's going to be something that shakes the earth, that cleaves the earth open, that changes the topography of the land. What could that be? Now, hear me out. If Christ ascended, and it takes great force to ascend, when he descends, it will be with great force. There won't be like, oh, what was that? Did you hear that? It'll be like, whoa, everyone, everywhere will hear somehow and know. And this is why when you read into the New Testament, when we read about the passages that talk about diverse events that will occur, do not conflate the rumors of wars and earthquakes and everything else with this event, which marks the time of Christ's return when his feet touch down on the Mount of Olives. And there's a lot of millennial material that is nestled in here for the temporal and spiritual blessings of the kingdom and absolute lordship of Christ. And why I say this is like crazy is that because for those who refuse, great and terrible punishment await. And this is kind of mind-boggling to me. And this shall be the plague wherewith the Lord will smite all the people that have fought against Jerusalem. Their flesh shall be consumed away while they stand upon their feet. Their eyes shall consume away in their holes, and their tongue shall consume away in their mouth. It does certainly sound like a nuclear meltdown to me, but I'll just leave that alone, okay? But if you keep reading, it says, and it shall come to pass in that day that a great tumult from the Lord shall be among them. They shall lay hold every one on the hand of his neighbor, and his hand shall rise up against the hand of his neighbor. And Judah also shall fight at Jerusalem, and the wealth of all the heathen round about shall be gathered together, gold, silver, apparel, in great abundance. And so shall be the plague of horse, of mule, camel, ass, all the beasts that shall be in these tents as this plague. And it shall come to pass that every one that is left of all the nations which came against Jerusalem shall even go up from year to year to worship the King, the Lord of hosts, and to keep the Feast of Tabernacles. Think about this. God is saying there won't be a table of stone directive. There will be a word spoken. You either hear it, receive it, and abide by it, or you reject it, refuse it, and it is to your demise. That's the picture being painted here. So when I say to you, again, I've probably not done great justice here. There's a reason for me highlighting this much Christ in this book. It's to show you that as you journey through the scriptures, we tend to kind of just put all the prophets together. Yes, they all cried, repent, turn back to the Lord. No, those were the opening words in the 3rd verse of the 1st chapter. But the rest of the book is telling these people, you're not connected. You're not right. Your standing is not correct. Your understanding is not right. And for turning to God, there is a future blessing, but guess what? You may or may not be part of it depending on what your actions, what your behavior, what your thoughts are towards all of it. That is the way I'd sift it down. I'd say that this is a very New Testament prophet in the sense of everything pointing to Christ, and the warnings that are there are not just some little tap on the hand. It's saying there will be consequences. Why? Because the carrying away, plagues didn't do it, the carrying away of the people didn't do it, the law couldn't eradicate, and Christ was not an afterthought, but Christ desperately had to come in the flesh and tent among us to bring about this, we'll call it final chapter of salvation, which in this book is painted as his first coming, as the blessing of the first advent, and the second coming to those who read it either a great blessing, welcome Lord, or a great curse, Why? Because for those who rejected, for those who despised, for those who didn't want to hear, or who read the book and said, that cannot be anything other than a Messiah that I have determined can only be the Messiah of what I've been told to believe and not the Messiah, Jesus Christ. There's too much information here in this book to just turn the other way and say, I'll have none of it. And better yet, I'd say for those of us who are reading this, there's actually a great lesson here. Do we need to keep going through the lessons, lesson after lesson after lesson? It shouldn't be so, but I'll just say this. God is very faithful to make his word come to pass. All of the combined prophets, and we're not done yet, but all of the combined prophets, everything that they said that came to unfold now is history. You've got the various kingdoms that came and went, the rise and fall of different kingdoms. The emphasis on some of these kingdoms is to denote something very important. You know, why would you highlight somebody like Alexander the Great or Nebuchadnezzar? Because it was the spirit in them that will resurrect in the spirit of that person, Antichrist. It will be that same spirit that actually is operating in the land today that desires to destroy and tear down under the guise of bringing together in unity in one pot. And the only way we can be brought together in unity in one way is through our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. So this book sends a very clear message. If you were looking back historically, the people still were stubborn and rebellious. So it's as though God is saying there will be consequences. Now just all you have to do is just pause for a second and ask, how is it that there are whole cloth swaths of society that completely, even though they read this book, completely reject Jesus Christ? Well, you have to just go back and read what Isaiah said. Because in Christ is salvation. This is why Isaiah said, they will not hear, they will not see, and it will basically prevent them from being saved. That is pretty scary when you think about it, that when I say every day when I wake up, I thank God that he woke me up, not just today as today, but he woke me up out of the darkness and brought me into the light. This is a book that when you're finished reading it, you should not only say, thank God for choosing me and raising me up, but thank God that God gave me and gave you eyes to see and ears to hear, to be able to receive the message, not treat it with contempt and not treat it with laxity, and to understand there's a very intricate story that's woven into these pages that, if read right, reveals the power of God and the finality for some. Yes, there will be a remnant that will be saved, but the finality for some, that God had more than enough to try and realign and get the people back and get them to be right and quit the lip service. As I said, we'll see in the book of Malachi. Malachi kind of puts the final nail in the coffin for the people, because if the priests weren't right, how could the people be right? With God, that is. So when I say to you, there's so many things that we can glean, not just that Christ is coming again and Christ is king and in Christ there's salvation, but also the consequences of a people who turn their back on God. I want you to think now about this day and age when people say, well, how is it? It's an age-old question. How is it that the wicked prosper? How is it that we used to be one nation under God, no one had any problem with it being in our currency, and now we're just a fraction people, until people start finding their eyes being opened. I can't open somebody's eyes, but until the eyes are opened and the heart is open to receive the message, it's judgment. That is what in the future is called the wrath of God. So this is not a message to say I'm trying to scare people into the kingdom. You know, with as much preaching as I want, with as much heart as I desire, I cannot bring somebody into the kingdom. Only God can. He can use my words, he can use something that was said, he can use a song, but only he can do that. So ask yourself the question, why are there so many people who have not yet turned to Christ in a day and age where the gospel's available, Bibles are readily available? Why is it? And then go back to looking at these people and understand that, yes, God had already kind of written this chapter to say, you will reject me. Just as you, by the way, rejected, if you go back to the time of Samuel and Saul, there's a pattern. And people were never satisfied. It was the few servants that spoke, that rallied the troops for God's sake. But in this day and age, we have a very dire problem. Starts in the pulpit with a lack of men and women who are ready to preach the gospel and talk about hard subjects, and people who are actually going to do the same thing that the people in the Bible did. Don't take it seriously, procrastinate and wait another day. But my Bible's very clear. It says today. Today, if you hear his voice today, not my voice, his voice, if you hear his voice, harden not your hearts like the children of Israel in the day of provocation, but turn immediately while it is still called today. There are very few people in the pulpit willing to say what I'm going to say, but until we get back to a real repentant spirit in the Church of Jesus Christ, until we get back to people looking to earnestly desire Christ and God's power and God's guidance and God's healing, all of that, not just for the benefits and saying, I want to reap the benefits, but I also desire to serve you, Lord. Until we get to that point, we're going to be just like these people viewed as stiff-necked and rebellious. So we all have a choice to make. And the choice you can see these people made their choice. They made their beds, and their past, which was present during Zechariah's day, is now past and is cemented clearly for us. So the question I leave you with today is, how should we, as believers in this day and age, think we're any better or any closer to God when we're still doing the same things? Being lax about God, being lax about God's house, the commitments, the stewardship, the responsibilities. That's a perplexing question. How can the Church of Jesus Christ survive when people are more worried about, like Haggai's day, taking care of they and them? And those are not the pronouns for the people, that's just a summary. Versus looking unto God and putting him first in thought every single day when you wake up, what comes out of your mouth, and at the time that you spend trying to build the relationship that you say you have with him. I know I just said something maybe that's quite insulting, but it should be a wake-up call for those people who say, I'm good. How good are you? I don't know. That's up to you, and that's between you and God, and that's my message. You've been watching me, Pastor Melissa Scott, live from Glendale, California at Faith Center. If you would like to attend the service with us Sunday morning at 11 a.m., simply call 1-800-338-3030 to receive your pass. If you'd like more teaching and you'd like to go straight to our website, the address is www.pastormelissascott.com.